going to go ahead and do a round robin of starting with Gibran. Can you start with, of course, anything that I missed in your bio, but then also highlighting the different pathways to energy liberation, or what you see in energy liberation, and how you got there by where you are sitting within EcoWorks and Detroit. So I will unmute you and.
So good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my path was kind of, a little bit winding and not direct to get into this space. It's related to my academic background in geology, but really the energy part just kind of came out of working with young people. And so for me, the path is primarily education. What's one thing that's core and central, even groups locally here in Metro Detroit that have made really impactful work and gotten a lot of headway, is that being able to not only engage the residents, but also bring the level of education up as far as what can be done, what's the potential, and then the power that you have. I think knowing is a lot of power in the knowing. So here at EcoWorks, really that's the core part is education, and it's partnering with those in the neighborhood and the community. So I always defer in the sense of people in particular neighborhoods or areas that are already on the ground have much higher level of knowledge and insight. And so it's either letting you know what's out there, what's the potential to ownership, and how you can approach reimagining what it looks like in your community as far as sustainability, whether it comes to green stormwater infrastructure, whether it comes to energy freedom, whether that's community solar or rooftop solar, or even just the partners in your community that are important and significant, how to move them along that pathway to a more sustainable and less harmful impact on the environment around you. So that's kind of I think connecting the resources and also letting you know the potential. Think big. I mean, I always get excited when I come across any group or organization where they really want to go big, and I'm always delighted when I come across new partners that actually, when you start talking solar, you start talking about community members, you start talking about the young people. That's a good thing because that helps you set up the potential for the ownership. And another part is just the training, which I think is a challenge. And even in my position, we find that to be one of those ones that's a little slower, the workforce and the training part. But I think, again, along with the education, that kind of sets the table. Even if you're an active, I think just recently, a couple of weeks ago, I had an active community group that we one of our EcoD neighborhoods in the city, and we have 4 different neighborhoods we kind of work with in particular, but we work with all different members, and they just wanted a little bit. Can you tell me? He was just tell me a little bit of what it's like to be a solar installer. Is there a way? Where can I go to get some information on what's that job look like? And that seemed kind of odd to me at the time, but I thought about it, yeah, I just we assume that oh yeah, somebody knows what that is or knows what the day in the life of a person is installing solar or so that's just a little anecdote to show how it's still the education is still key, exposure and seeing it. People can see it, whether it's a nonprofit leader or whether it's a community member of a neighborhood. They need to be able to see stuff in their community, and then that makes you get excited about the idea of the ownership, is seeing it, touching it, being able to understand it, ask questions. Real time, real.
Great. We're gonna go to Rafael Mojica. Did I get it right? Okay.
Perfect.
All right. So same question. What has been the pathway to solidarity to practice energy justice and utility justice to get to energy justice? Because I see solidarity been operating in this type of format for some years now. So tell us the story of how solidarity has got there, and then we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, well, thank you, everybody. I'm always excited when I'm invited to be in spaces like this, because, in this day and age, working from home, you're kind of stuck in certain bubbles, and anytime that you can, get out there and do knowledge sharing is really valuable to me. So the founding, purpose of Soulardarity was focused on responding to the 1,000 plus streetlights that were repossessed from the city of Highland Park when it was under financial receivership with the emergency financial manager that was appointed by Governor Snyder at the time. And that was back in 2011. And Soulardarity was founded in 2012 with the goal to find a pathway to replace those streetlights. The main criticisms that our community was entering into this fight was how could streetlights, something as essential as a service of streetlights, be considered as something that was okay to be cut from the budget to balance the books. It keeps us safe, it helps improve public health, and it has, such a widespread impact on all the other valuable spaces that we need to exist in as community members. So we went into the fight with those questions on our end, and we actually started to, with every answer that we were finding, we were starting to identify even more and more questions. That the issue of energy is not just something that is locally isolated to the importance of keeping a street light on, to keeping the lights on in your home, but it also helps identify a very complex but also ongoing system of systemic racism in our communities, and a whole new category for a lot of different people of community redlining. And we started to realize that our infrastructure was nowhere near on the same level of quality of the inner suburbs like Grosse Pointe.
To the Justice 40 initiative, and how we could see the Justice 40 initiative influencing how some of these programs are being implemented as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so I never want to make assumptions about where people are at in their understanding of the Justice 40 initiative. So just want to quickly give an overview of what Justice 40 is. So for those of you who aren't as familiar, so very early on in the Biden
and how that translates into all of the different sources of systemic racism that our communities experience. But also at the same time too, we have to address the issue of accessibility of individual residents to this issue, because if you are, we realize, even from a full-time organizer perspective, looking at the big picture as a whole can be very overwhelming for people, and it can be a little bit hard to parse out, what are the different compartments of problems and solutions. And so we've also decided that it is incumbent upon us to make this issue even more accessible, which has been very beneficial for us, the fact that we've been founded on the issue of streetlights, because that is something that can be easily relatable to, because it's an issue that people in our residential spaces in Highland Park are experiencing every single day, or rather every single night when the sun goes down and we have no illumination or footprints in our neighborhoods. But we want to create the level of accessibility to be inclusive also for the powers that that be, when it comes to our Michigan Public Service Commission, when it comes to our local government, when it comes to our state government, county government, etc., even our federal government. And so that's really the only way that we're going to be able to get ourselves on a pathway of community ownership, because right now, as the way that the system stands, is the only thing that people understand at the moment, and people do not understand that it is not the only option out there, and that actually it is more accessible than people realize, but also it can be way more accessible than the way it is right now.
Thanks so much. Greg, we're gonna go ahead and pivot to you, then Jamez, we're gonna come to you. So you're focused in the policy area, Gregory, and what was the process of moving the CEJA bill and engaging community residents? Like, what were some of the obstacles? Do you feel that the process that you guys had was great? Where were some obstacles? Like, what's the status of where you all are right now?
What was that last statement? I didn't hear the last one, please.
What is the status of where you all are now in regards to community engagement and implementation within the CEJA?
Well, I'm going to start off with the status of where we're at right now, and that is the implementation phase. But I'm going to back up to where this all began for me, and that was in 2016 when our previous governor, Ronna, passed what was called the Future Energy Jobs Act, FEJA. And in that job act, I would like to refer to it just like a new cell phone. Every year they come out with a new one, they make something better every year, add features to it. And this is where CEJA came in at. We got CEJA started with over 100 and some community-based organizations, people from all walks of life, and just common people. And that's why I refer to it as the People's Bill. And one of the reasons for doing that was because FEJA did not meet a lot of the intended requirements. Like it was not accessible to all. It did not cover the state like it was intended to do. So bouncing back to CEJA, working with CEJA, one of the things that we did to really make sure that we got CEJA passed and stayed bounded as a whole was we stayed true to our principles on the purpose that we were addressing equity. One of our phrases became, no equity, no deal. And remember, we're only talking about passing the bill, not really implementation. And I really want to close on that. And so obstacles that we faced were a lot of our unions didn't want this to happen. And I'm just speaking the truth. Now, I'll give you one question I was asked. I was speaking to the Senate and I was talking about, historical racism from the union. And someone said, well, Gregory, are you against the union? I said, wait a minute, hold up. Why should I be against someone who has what I want? I want them to have it too, but I want it as well. So no, I'm not against the unions. I just feel that I and other people, Black and brown people, should be able to live out a quality life and raise a family and earn a prevailing wage in doing so. So that ended that question as far as being against the unions. However, another problem we had is really this organization right here has got us grounded in this open, and that was community engagement. Really having access to people who have been lied to, told that they're going to get jobs and go to a program and get a little bit of stipend. And after this program is over with, they go right back to the corner that they came from. I didn't say the home they came from. I said the corner that they came from, because a lot of them get used like that so that programs in communities will reach their quota. This is true. This is real talk, and that's what I love about the space. So we actually targeted those people, foster care people, returning citizens, people who are, formerly incarcerated, or people who graduated with low skills, no skills, not able to read. That was our target. That was one of our major targets in CEJA. And then we had our Jamez principle and our environmental justice of color principles that, really kept us grounded and founded toward our purpose. So we stayed true to our moral values, and people told truth to what was needed to be done in CEJA to overcome or to at least pass a bill that will work at removing the barriers of systemic racism. And you heard in my mission statement that I love to get to the root cause, and to address a problem from its holistic standpoint of view. When you don't do that, you're just cookie cutting things that has happened throughout the centuries of this nation, and you're not really moving things or trying to move the needle forward. I'm going to say that we had a real dynamic group of people, and still do. We had what I call family fights, but those fights was for addressing real issues. One of the concerns were that if they put certain things in the program, would Black people be able to do it? And we had people to say, well, it is commonly known that if a Black person has a business, Black people will hire more Black people because they have that business. But that is not the real case here. Go back to technology. When technology came out, we was kept out of that, and we still today have a digital divide, and other countries who got the technology from this country have soared and even exceeded the expectation of where the technology came from. but we're still, again, as COVID has identified, have this digital divide. I hope that I'm coming across again is that in passing the bill. So in September the 15th, Governor Rana, he signed the bill. When he signed the bill, I'm going to say a phrase that he said, almost a 99% quote. He walked to the podium and he said, this country is about to do something this nation has never done before. And that is start to give equity from the bill to Black and brown people. And that is something has yet to be seen. There's a lot of talk about it. We still haven't seen it yet. It's looking pretty good, but that engagement needs to be there and that implementation needs to occur. So after that was said, a week later, we ended up getting an award, our coalition, not the governor. The governor did his job when he helped push in our state speaker saying no equity, no deal, and then signed the bill. But the United Nations gave our coalition an award because of the nature of this bill, the equity, reducing people's energy was really a plus in this whole bill. Another plus was that we got in the bill where solar training programs was going to be coming from. So we got that all locked in the bill. We got designated places or designated areas. One of the major things we did, because we know that programs come to our community and it flies all over the Black neighborhoods, but they're able to write in their proposal, look at what we did in the community. But the Black and brown people in the communities, in those communities, I mean, the Black and brown people of the neighborhoods in those communities did not experience the benefit of what the community experienced. And this is where we're at right now. You know, these words that I use sometime, another word was minority. We really worked hard at that. All the lawyers, all the scientists, all the grassroots people really worked hard at getting that word minority removed, because it is well known that as the white woman being a minority and being really connected to the institution will normally be the one who would benefit from all the programs that will come out. And by the time we even got knowledge of it, it was a done deal, gone, and something new was being done. That being said, the bill was passed and we got rid of the minority and we started using the word BIPOC. Now, I'm going to say that BIPOC is a great phrase, Black, Indigenous, people of color. That is very true. But there's one that I really prefer that speaks to me and Black people specifically as it relates to those who have been disenfranchised in this community. And that is ADOS, African or American descendants of slaves. That is what I am pushing, as I also push for the equality and equity for BIPOC. But my focus is ensuring that we're addressing those grassroots problems and systemic racism and equity as it relates to ADOS. So we got BIPOC in the bill, and now the bill is passed, and we're beginning to address the obstacles and barriers that exist from the bill being passed in the implementation phase. That being said, that's where we're at with our status, addressing the problems, because one of our key phrases that has been adopted is that now that we have won the bill, our phrase is now we got to win the win. Because it's in the bill does not mean people want it to happen. Does not mean you have all the necessary players that you need to be engaged. Does not mean that you have all the partnership that you need in order for it to be what it needs to be. I'm going to close on this because two people said this. When it comes to Gibran and the last gentleman, Rafael, the bill was designed to make it accessible to those people who have been disenfranchised. That was a key part. That's why I said it was designated, and we fought to make sure that it was in the community and that the bill is supposed to be community-based driven. Now we'll close on this. A community college is not a grassroots community-based organization.
Thank you so much, Gregory. Thank you so much for that. I feel like I just got lectured too, but you know, he can always set us straight. And thanks so much for breaking a lot of the terminology down for us, our newcomers regarding ADOS, BIPOC. A lot of people are new to the space and need to know the difference. So we're going to move to Brother Jamez Staples. Same question. Tell us the story about the pathways to get into energy liberation. And we feel like, you know, some people may not feel like it's energy liberation just yet, but you're doing the work at Renewable Energy Partners. So could you tell us the story, how you got there, some obstacles that you may have experience, because we may have people here who may want to emulate the same thing. So I'll stop there and let you have the floor. We can't hear you, and no. You are unmuted actually on my end. Nope. Okay, we can hear you now.
You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that.
Of course.
Thank you, Mark, for the opportunity to be on the panel. To my other panelists, phenomenal stories. I appreciate the all the work that you all have done. So as was mentioned, my name is Jamez Staples. I'm the CEO of Renewable Energy Partners. We're a solar installation and development firm. And Marnese asked me to share my story. I don't want to hog too much time, but I'll share as much as I possibly can with them being respectful. I started the Solar Energy Jobs. Minnesota had the Solar Energy Jobs Act, which was enacted back in 2013 or early 2014. And Minnesota is one of the places that we point to consistently and say it's one of the worst places in the country for Black people. And so back then I said to myself, why are we not fixing the problem? We need to start businesses in order to create the jobs so that people can actively participate in the emerging sectors of the economy, i.e. solar, energy efficiency, and some of the other areas that are growing, such as heat pumps and electric vehicle charging stations. And so with that, I started the company, worked on a roof, brought a couple people from the neighborhood to get involved so they could start to see what it's like to work on a roof on a solar project, but quickly realized that they didn't know what they were doing. And through that period of them not knowing what they're doing, I recognized that they needed access to, they needed training. So I looked at where the training was, and I said, kind of like what my previous panelists said, who controls the training, where is it at? So the Minnesota State College University system has training, in addition to the unions have training. Well, the college system is 2 hours away by transit if you don't have a car to get the skills training for solar. The IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Union, they are 30 to 45 minutes away by car with no public transit to get you there either. And so what I did is because my intent for starting the business was to create jobs and not just benefit myself, but the overall community, I said, why don't we just bring training to the neighborhood? And so quickly realized that the state of Minnesota owned a building. I live in North Minneapolis, which is an underserved neighborhood. I'm born and raised over here. I tried living in the suburbs, didn't like it, moved back. And so I live a half a block from a state-owned building. And at the time, the state had vacated the building and they said that they were going to put it up for sale. And so I said, why don't you just use that building as a training center to get people involved with these, to get them the skills training so they could actually participate in these emerging sectors. So a bunch of political gymnastics took place. The short and the story, I ended up buying the building specifically for the purposes of turning it into a training center. Because in addition, when you look at the aggregated disparities, you talk about education, income, home ownership, health and wellness, jobs, many Black people are doing the worst in Minnesota. So I said, if you don't want to use that building, we'll buy it. So we ended up buying a 22,000 square foot one level building specifically for the purposes of turning it into a training center. And at the time, the Minneapolis Public Schools District had an interest in creating a centralized career and technical education facility, centralized model. And I said to myself, well, let's work together and do it. And so I approached the district. There was a bunch of, kind of head nodding and agreement and whatnot. But then after we acquired the property, the district decided not to work with us. And so, but part of the district's own information, the PowerPoint that I came across, we found that graduation rates increased, speaking specifically to education, the first panelist mentioned, and getting young people acclimated and involved with these career pathways. Graduation rates increased 11.5% across the board for students who took one career and technical education program. Students of color, African-American graduation rates increased 13%. Hispanics increased 19%. Native Americans increased, I want to say 23%, but just by learning with their hands, if they took at least one career and tech ed course. And so when I recognized that information was important, and it was in the building sits on one of the highest used transit lines in the state of Minnesota, which gives it kind of a regional access point. I said we absolutely have to make this a training center for young people as well as the adults in the community. And so after acquiring the building, we applied for some money. We ran into some problems with the unions also that were kind of puppeteering the politicians, who basically didn't want to release the funds that have been allocated towards the project because of their political concerns as it related to, you know, their reelectability. And so we fought for 2 years, and we ended up getting those funds released. Almost 2 years to the date, we finally got those funds released. And since then, we have made substantial improvements to the building. We put 174 kilowatts of solar on the roof. We've got a battery storage system in partnership with the University of Minnesota. We have a heat pump system that will put the gas utility on standby. We have a stormwater management system, which we're managing all the stormwater on site, in addition to electric vehicle charging stations on the parking lot. And so now that we're in the process of making that happen, we were running that, we're still running that project, getting it all the way buttoned up and the interior modifications improved, which we went to the legislature and sought funding, and the unions did push back against us to get those funds, but we did get them allocated. We're currently in the process of making the physical improvements to the interior. But what's important is, like what was mentioned earlier, is that it's a living laboratory where young people can get the skills and training to actively, again, participate. Because if we don't start to address the issue of getting our young people acclimated, then we won't have a workforce for the future. And so now I'll talk a little bit more, and that's Northgate Development, which owns the property. And I'll talk a little bit more about Renewable Energy Partners. So now we're also side by side running solar development projects. We're developing projects, and we're vertically integrating our process where we'll be ultimately installing our own projects. We have some minority installers that we work with specifically, in addition to a couple other African Americans specifically, but we also have some other BIPOC partners that we work with on our install side. And so, you know, the whole thing for me has been focused on the discussion of equity, and equity talk kind of gets a lot of different hats. You know, I look at it from a business proposition perspective. And so the objective for us at Renewable Energy Partners is to make sure that we're creating a pathway for young people, as well as people from the adult people from the community, to get the skills and training and then be able to have a job at the end. And so we are, as I mentioned, we are developing projects. We capitalize and utilize a lot of public funding to get the building up and stood up, and you can too. And I think it's imperative that in order to address the issues, we need to be very intentional about how we move in this space and make sure that we are being intentional about the people who we engage with around what's happening. Because as was mentioned earlier, if we don't know what's going on, it's a high probability that we will not actively be engaged to participate or earn from the transition that's taking place. And so one of my mentors said to me, he said he was on the XL Energy board, but he served as the vice president of what was it? He worked for EEI as vice president of regulatory. And he said to me, he said, this was probably 7 years ago when I kind of first started this thing. He said, if we miss this, this is like us missing the .com era all over again. And so, you know, it's important that, you know, we be intentional about the work that we're doing. And, but we are developing projects. We've got a microgrid project, which we're developing further down the block on the roof of 3 Minneapolis public school buildings, a 4th building, which is across the street, which equates to about 1.6 megawatts aggregated. We just submitted for 60 megawatt development RFP from a 900 megawatt RFP, but we only submitted for 60 megawatts of solar development and installation for XL Energy, our local utility here. We just installed a 360 kilowatt solar system on the rooftop of my old high school, which I live a half a block away from, that's probably my favorite project thus far. I mean, we've got a bunch of different projects that we've done, but in terms of challenges, we did run into challenges with the unions, in addition to some other folks. There are people that don't believe that we're able and capable, but we have to show them up by having the right people in partnership with us. We were told when I was, so the project on the roof of North High, and I'll kind of cede my time after I tell this brief story. The city of Minneapolis issued an RFP for a low-income community solar garden. And the solar garden, we submitted, we were selected, and they said, okay, we want to put out here in Fridley, which is a neighboring suburb, which I didn't think that made any sense. And so I said, why don't we put it in the neighborhood? So they went back to their little respective corner. We came over to the public school district and asked if we could put it on the rooftop of the school. And the school told us no. And I'm not one that's going to ever take no for an answer. I mean, obviously I'm going to exhaust all my legal ramifications in terms of what's possible before I take it. So they told me no. I climbed that level higher. They told me no, and then I climbed all the way to the chief operations officer, and then I finally got a yeah. Now it took another year for them to re-roof that portion of the building, which we wanted to put the solar garden on, and then finally the city came back and said that we could put it on the roof. But it only made sense that we have these assets deployed in our neighborhood so that folks from the neighborhood know what this stuff looks like, know what it is, and we can actively kind of like understand how we engage with it. And so when people were up on the roof installing, we allowed for other folks to come up so they could see what was going on. Our state senator at the federal level has come out and visited the site, in addition to the congresswoman and others, U.S. Bank, a lot. And so when you start to make the necessary moves and really stay committed to the work that you do, I think that other people kind of see you as if you're real, right? Some people do the stuff promoting themselves. I think it's important that you just stay authentic. And so now we have Fortune 500 companies who have never financed a project of this size, which is small in their regard. They are used to financing big 10 and 20 megawatt projects. They expressed an interest in financing this project. We got other Fortune 500 companies, local companies that have expressed interest in working with us on various projects, which is Target. We were just allocated a project. So I'll park it there. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks so much for dropping those jewels of definitely being authentic and not doing it for yourself, because people will see right through that, and it builds mistrust when you don't act in an authentic way. But then I wanted Rafael to actually kind of get into that a little bit. I know we talked about some of the obstacles around community engagement, and I know Soulardarity does a lot of utility justice campaigning. Can you talk about how do you engage people in Highland Park, Michigan, specifically in this process? So I know DTE Energy repossessed lights. We started educating and doing some campaigns, door knocking. But then what has been the next step of engagement with the DTE Work For Me campaign that is actively going right now? But then also, how are people feeling about this campaign?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we like to describe Soulardarity is it's a fight and build organization. But both approaches, to this issue, either, trying to do it from a confrontational, approach to a trying to create a building pathway towards alternatives, requires trust from the community. Especially, from the community that either your organization is based in or where you're trying to influence energy policy in. I have the habit of saying we a lot when I'm in Highland Park spaces, mainly because, that comes from a history of an organizer trying to, demonstrate a stakeholder perspective and role in these issues. But I also try to be very mindful to remind folks that I don't live in Highland Park. I live in Southwest Detroit in Mexican Village. But the issues that we're building on, are widespread beyond Highland Park. And so at least from a personal organizer perspective, that's the approach that I try to take. But also at the same time too, you can only be focusing on abstract solutions that are, ideas that are applied in a large geographic area. And you have to start talking about problems and solutions in a centralized way. And that's what we've been doing in Highland Park. What Soulardarity has been doing in Highland Park for 10 years now. This is its 10th anniversary. And currently we are, yes, engaged in a legal intervention to fight against DTE's proposed rate hike, which will be impacting the whole service area of DTE, which is the largest in the state and one of the largest in the country. But we are also using build tactics as a way of, a combination of both pushing away from DTE and trying to bring people into a mindset that DTE is not the only option, but also at the same time trying to make a impact on a lot of the prevalent problems that Highland Park has been going through for many decades. One example of one of our build approaches is we are participating in a federal program called Communities Leap. We were one of 24 communities in the country and the only community in the state of Michigan that was selected by the Department of Energy to participate in a technical assistance program where they will be focusing the resources of the Department of Energy as well as the National Renewable Energy Laboratory on helping us put the Highland Park on a pathway towards renewable energy infrastructure such as solar or geothermal energy. But right from the get-go, even from when we applied to that program to when we were selected for that program to when we had our first meeting with representatives from those two federal departments, at least with me, I was coming in with a little bit of trepidation and caution, because whenever I hear the idea of the federal government wanting to come into a community to help, it usually means that they are coming in to tell us what our problems are and what should be our solutions to those problems. When in fact it should be the other way around. They should be coming in saying, hey, this is what we can do for you, and then pretty much shut up at that point and listen to what we have to say on how those solutions or resources can be applied. And luckily that was the case, you know, with our two representatives from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And they came in listening to the community stakeholder group of various organizations from Highland Park, Avalon Village, Parker Village, the city of Highland Park, as well as in addition to Soulardarity. And they were more focused on getting a very clear understanding from community stakeholders' perspectives in Highland Park of what are the prevailing problems and what have been some of the solutions that we've been exploring in the past. One example, you know, of that solution exploration was our partnership with the Union of Concerned Scientists, where we put out a pretty comprehensive report called "Let Communities Choose." I'll put it in the chat right now for folks to read if they are interested, where it basically outlined a pathway of renewable energy infrastructure for the city of Highland Park, at least from a somewhat I don't want to say high level, because it's definitely not high level, but it is at least to the point where we could provide that kind of an explanation of a pathway to the information that was at least available to us, that DTE definitely was not willing to just give us wholesale beyond that information that is in there. But it definitely, you know, helped with partnerships like that in terms of trying to start to get ourselves on a pathway towards renewable energy, but not just renewable energy, but community-owned energy. And that was building on, you know, one of the talking points that we usually got the most response from when it comes to our streetlights is that we don't want to just replace these streetlights that DTE repossessed. We want to replace these streetlights that are solar powered, that are Wi-Fi mesh network enabled, that will spill out free internet, which is another issue of concern that was made very, very clear to us from the COVID pandemic. But also it's owned by the city, by residents, and that there will be no chance ever in the future, ever again, to happen that DTE can repossess or anybody else can repossess those streetlights, that it has to be community owned. And people, you know, that resonates powerfully with people. And we try to take that similar approach of understanding towards a community-wide perspective of how all of our electricity is produced, which can be, if you start the other way around first, it can be a daunting task. Some, like even people who agree with us about community-owned solar streetlights get a little bit trepidatious about the idea of breaking away from an investor-owned utility like DTE, which is totally understandable because just you know, like what was mentioned, you know, earlier before by Mr. Norris, is that if you are coming into a community with so-called solutions, but you are not coming in with a mindful approach of how to implement it in a way that is meeting the a community where they are at, you are only going to be extractive from them. You're going to hurt them, and you're going to leave them with a potential mess that they are going to have to be picking up later on down the line, whether you are a organization that is based in that community or an organization from outside of that community. The same hazards are still there. So that's what I mean by accessibility from when I first spoke, is that we need to be willing to be patient, take the time that we need to build trust with community, to create a greater level of accessibility to information that we, at least as an organization, have available to us, but also get past our organization, you know, our nonprofit organized egos, and learn from a community on how to deliver that information that in a necessary way that can be an effective community-wide focus. And that has been a learning process for me personally, even in my 15 years of community organizing and being from a community of color and growing up in a community of color. It is a constant process that needs to be taken in building that trust, because just because you're working in a community that has a similar population as your hometown does not mean you have the same problems and the same issues and the same kinds of leadership that are there too. So I strongly encourage, you know, for everybody to take a look at that feasibility study that I just shared with everybody. In addition, I'll just close my comments there, but I'm going to be sharing the blueprint for energy democracy to go in a little bit further detail about our approach in terms of community ownership and engagement.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you so much for giving those jewels and tools for us to take back. I wanted to go back to, and I don't know, maybe Jamez and Gibran, maybe you guys can talk more about what does the difference between a private ownership, community ownership, or cooperative ownership look like? Because some people may not feel that everything is for them, or that maybe their community can do everything. So what does each one of those look like? Private ownership, community ownership, cooperative ownership, when we're trying to advance clean energy?
Well, I'll pick that up. I would say I'm a big fan of cooperatives. I think that it's all about intentionality, right? I'm a private guy. Because I just feel like I'm going to do what's best for the neighborhood, period, right? And so for me, it's about somebody's got to develop a project, and there needs to be an entity that gets paid for that, right? And then that process of getting paid for that project, there needs to be some employment of people from community, right? In addition to the installation of those projects. Those projects need to be, so as you own it yourself, right? For me, I control everything. And I make decisions based upon my intentions without necessarily having to go through a bunch of different, you know, processes. Cooperative ownership, you know, I think it's a great tool, depending on, you know, the level of expertise. If you could bring the right people in that could aid and assist in getting the projects over the finish line, as well as what the benefits are, right? There are some cooperatives here with, and a good friend of mine who's an attorney. He's one of the biggest. One of the best cooperative lawyers in the country. He's always pushing me around cooperatives. I say, listen, I'll be the developer. We can create more, we can spawn off more installation cooperatives, then that's the route to go, right? Because I can't go through a process where I have to deal with a bunch of different boats to get something done, right? I just need to get it done. And so around the installation teams, if they want to be cooperatives, great, let's figure it out. But the other element, I don't know, you said publicly, you said?
Yeah, private, public, cooperative ownership.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't think that, I think there should be some ownership in these gardens, specifically solar gardens, even the assets. These are assets that are going to generate revenue for 25 years for community solar gardens specifically, as well as the solar system. So if there's a way that you can do a deal that will ultimately You could add more. You can create an investment co-op, right? You can create a small investment group yourself to pitch in on these projects. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about strategically positioning one for success, not just one, but the collective. Because I think it's important that we own things, right? And that's why I'm a private guy, because it's like nonprofits cannot create jobs, right? They can create maybe 5 jobs, 10 jobs, maybe even if you're a bigger nonprofit, but they aren't really in the business of being in business, where when you are in business, you ultimately eat what you kill, right? And if you can grow in that environment, you ultimately have the ability to, if you're successful, right, you have an unlimited amount of jobs that you can create. And so that's why.
Gibran, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, and it's great what he was saying about just the ability for nonprofits, because I think sometimes, like, as I've been in this space for a little while now, just over a decade, I've noticed that is a challenge unless you're like intimately like tied to like some funding stream from the state and federal government just giving you like a lifeline. Always you get in a constant flow. Then maybe you can create jobs, you can swell, but it's, I think the key workaround is the cooperative workspace, like you mentioned, like installer groups. And that's what I've come to like kind of realize, that that's like kind of a secret magic bullet that people might not be thinking about, because I do a utility program, right? So I take advantage of something that the utility is required to do to help low income, just people who really just don't have enough income, mid-moderate income. They need these upgrades in their home, and I use that program to provide that. But ideally, unless I intentionally decide that, hey, I want to work with Black contractors, I want to find a Hispanic contractor, then it doesn't matter. I mean, you just get a contractor to do the work, and people get what they get. So that intentionality is important. So I intentionally seek out diverse contractors, and more specifically, folks that look like me in the community that I'm serving. Like, and that's just what I do. And then, so if you imagine if I have that leverage, that ability to say, well, okay, in addition to that, how about I can leverage that cooperative space where now I'm giving ownership. So it's not just I'm hiring, I'm saying, here, you guys are the owners of this, but you're going to do these installs. You're going to install these heat pumps. You're going to go get a couple more guys that want to climb on roofs and do roofs, and they used to do roofs, and you're going to get them certified, and they're going to do the solar. And then you go find another couple guys, they don't mind crawling around in the attic space or whatever, and they're going to do that insulation. That's how you build this out. That's that ownership part, right? So when you got the cooperatives doing the work installing, then you got Jamez doing what he's doing, the private side, because you need those private sides that kind of help to get these projects going. And even the public you mentioned, he didn't touch on this. We have to force our political people to like stop being like soft. I'm gonna just say it like that. Like he mentioned, he was doing 3 schools rooftops, and I'm like, there's no reason why. I'm just totally disappointed not seeing that here where I'm in Detroit. Where all these new schools should have had solar. I mean, they're great. They were like with green buildings. They did that. They were like LEED certified, but they didn't like do the solar. You know what I mean? It's like, well, you just did them in the last decade or so, 15 years. Like, you should put some solar. Yeah, the cost would have been a little, but you got to do that. And so I say part of that public-private is pushing for public. Don't let our officials just take on like solar projects where the utility is saying, here, we want to try something out. That's cool, but you needs to be in the language where it's like that ownership transfers over to the city, and then it transfers over. And then once it's transferred over, a portion of it, then now you can assign that asset, because again, it's an asset, but just like allowing the third party utility or the direct utility to have that asset, and that's it. And say, look, we got a few people that we're gonna help. That's not community. That's not ownership. We got to look at it like, no, it has to be in a language where a portion of that, and maybe it's a transfer, a slow transfer, right? Because maybe you don't necessarily want to have the complete responsibility of that solar farm, that solar field, but that doesn't mean that you can't walk that out to where after 5 years, so 10 years, it's completely community owned. And so just that initial like data capturing that the utility might want to get and refinement and making sure it's talking to the grid properly and all that good stuff. And they can build up substations around it adequately. That's all well and done, but no, you're gonna pass that asset off to the community, And so again, that's kind of like, I think, all together, like you said, private, public, cooperative, and in the nonprofit space. In my case, I'm even looking at just making sure that we try to like identify small community partners that have buildings. I just saw something that came through today, and making sure that, hey, this is what you can do, right? You already own your building. You already doing good work, whatever you're doing, whether you're a little small private business or you're a nonprofit doing something. And you probably haven't thought about that, the cost of that. But that's another level of ownership, because again, now you're setting up the idea for microgrids, and that's a whole nother level of ownership. If we can have more commercial building owners just employing these renewables, right? Because now you got a couple levels of ownership. You're owning power production that at some point, if you don't use it all, goes back on the grid, right? So that's an asset, right? The actual potential, that production, that 25-year production of solar, or you going ahead and taking a plunge and throwing that battery on the back. That's all that stuff that's coming down the line when you redo the grid. You know what I'm saying? Like that demand response. So now you might can cobble together 10, 15, 20 businesses in a certain area. I get them all solar battery. And now as a collective, maybe they might operate as a cooperative when they engage with the utility, right? Because in the end, we're going to be providing these grid services, and that's why they don't want to relinquish or, in some cases here, open that up, because those are like assets that are valuable to everyone, so I'll pause there.
Thank you. So as we wrap up, and we're going to go to Rafael, I want us to all think about what does this mean for the future of clean jobs, especially with monies coming down to our communities, and how communities can take advantage of these dollars, from these federal dollars. Like, how can we encourage community members to step into this liberation mindset of owning your own, right? So Rafael, I'm gonna go to you, then Gregory, then Jamez. We're gonna all wrap up, and then we're gonna take some questions. So everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the chat so we can entertain those.
Yeah, so I think that one of the main things that we really like to make aware to people, whether they want to be aware of it or not, is that the renewable energy industry is dominated by white males. And there are very few providers out there, both installers and producers, that are, pretty much representative of the communities that need it the most, that this technology that need it the most. And one of the projects that we're doing right now in terms of installing 10 solar street lights, we're very, very glad to have a homegrown renewable energy provider in Highland Park. And it's incumbent, that first of all, we need to start supporting our localized producers and installers in our communities, and start empowering them to, gain access to spaces that will give them those opportunities to grow and to be able to compete. But then also at the same time too, when communities are starting to explore or starting to take the advancing steps of a pathway towards renewable energy infrastructure, they can't just be talking about getting the best and cleanest energy production methods in their community. We also need to talk about who is going to build it, who is going to install it, who is going to maintain it. And ideally, it needs to be the community that is benefiting from that energy production. Because when you put the dependency in of those services in somebody else's hands, especially from outside the community, you are at their will. And even if you were, say, a community that was successful in breaking away from an investor-owned utility where you were at their will at that time, you're only transferring yourself to be vulnerable to another source at that point. Like what Gibran said, it can't be just an overnight sort of thing, but it needs to be something that is consistently being kept in consideration. That is one of our focuses in the Communities LEAP program that we're participating in, but it's also been something that we've been working on. We have a program that's called the Rise Up Training Program, which is a partnership with the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, where we provide scholarships for NABCEP certification training. NAPCEP certification, for folks that don't know, is basically the industry standard that shows that you are qualified to install rooftop solar, residential solar technology, or commercial solar technology. And we think that that's one of the first steps that needs to be taken. Also, the provider that we are getting our solar street lights from, if we're trying to, push them in, to create a greater level of stakeholdership in the community of Highland Park. If you are going to be making money off of us and becoming, us, the city of Highland Park, becoming one of your larger clients, you need to take stakeholdership in our community. And we're, trying to push, providers to do that. But again, we need to be focusing on what's already in our communities in the first place. So ideally, we want the production, we want the installation, and we want the maintenance of our renewable energy infrastructures in all of our communities to be coming from there.
Gregory, you have anything you can offer as we end on how to get more communities involved, especially in the policy area? And why is this important now? Since we have federal dollars, like what?
I really will start with CJ as to the important. Remember, we was just talking about the passing of the bill and not the implementation of the bill. And we're at the implementation of the bill, and the bill was intended to do a lot of things that Rafael said. It was to actually get people who needs to be involved in doing the training because they have the connection to those people, not the universities and not the college. Our university is written the curriculum. Now you're talking about foster care people, returning citizens that haven't even gone to a community college, and then the university is going to connect with them. And our bill talks about the necessary of the right language that people need to be able to communicate to these people, even to these people being Black and brown people, again, who have been disenfranchised, can't read, can't write, but yet they do have talents and skills, even though they lack those academia skills. Now you're talking about a university writing a curriculum to communicate, what they need to learn. And next thing you know, it's going to be the professor who needs to go out there and teach the class, not the community organizer, which the bill was intended to serve, for that purpose. Get that community organizer engaged. Get them the funding that they need to not only teach their own, but to own their own, and to give those Black and brown people the opportunity for equity. I'm going to say something, I don't mean any harm by it, and it's the truth. We keep on talking about this certification that people need to teach. What certification did the people who landed at Plymouth Rock hunt? There was no cookbook. There were people who showed them how to use the food. So that's the opportunity we're looking for. We're not trying to dismiss anyone in their own ability, because they are needed. We need the college's involvement. We need the communication of the community college's involvement. We need to know what they know, but they do not need to be the one who need to be taking the helm of this all. That is what I offer. That is what I offer.
Thank you, Gregory. Gibran, any last thoughts? Because once again, these breakout rooms is not our friend this afternoon. So any last thoughts, Gibran? I'm so sorry to wrap up.
I just say this is an awesome space, and we just continue to intentionally just connect with each other in our communities, just doing the work. And if we keep doing that, then we're gonna see the growth in the building take place.